creation of Caligula has as much mythology behind it as the life of the Emperor Gaius Caligula himself.
I, Caligula Caesar, command... Open your eyes, proculars.
When we think about Caligula, we think about two films. We think about a magnificent, historical, sumptuous, perverse film, which is directed by Tinto Brass. And then we also think about a pornographic film, which is directed by Bob Guccione, head of Penthouse. And this is indeed what happened when Caligula was created. We have a very respectable, albeit quite lush film with incredibly famous and respectable thespians such as Malcolm McDowell, John Gielgud, Helen Mirren and Peter O'Toole. But then we also see in the uncut version of Caligula the inserts that are pure pornography in a very explicit way that's for the 1970s was still considered quite radical. And in this way, Caligula itself is a hybrid film and it operates on two different levels. And this is also seen in the themes of the film, because Caligula is not just a filthy film about a depraved emperor, but it is also a film that has two different zones of frequency occurring in terms of the way we watch and the way that representation operates. On the first side, we have this indeterminable zone of perversion and pleasure. And this kind of pleasure is undifferentiated pleasure, where the body is absolutely free to circulate pleasure. So the gendering is very dynamic and the sexual acts are very dynamic, and food and sex and love and bodies all circulate freely in a way that is not defined by any kind of rigid or regimented ideology. And this is one of the great pleasures of the film, and we see this as a very Tinto Brass element that you also see in films like Sal and Kitty. And the scenes where we see Caligula walking along and looking at the freak show that is the pleasures of ancient Rome is a scene of excess, but excess without any reference. So all of the bodies are perverse, they're fabulated, they're kind of carnivalesque bodies in a Rabelaisian way. But then on the other hand, we have an operation that is very, very political and is defined by power rather than pleasure. And this is where the sex becomes regimented, but it's also where things like ideology and personality become regimented. And these are the laws of ancient Rome that lead to death, to murder, and that actually cut off pleasure or damn pleasure and turn pleasure into a kind of licit or illicit perversion. This is also the kind of pleasure in power that leads to true madness. So when we meet Caligula at the beginning, he's quite canny, he's quite knowledgeable about the ways in which he can protect himself. He's properly sycophantic to Peter O'Toole's incredibly syphilitic Tiberius. But as he is given freedom in power and his power becomes absolute, he spirals into this descent of madness because the rules are no longer in operation. And so in that sense, the more regimented he becomes, the madder he becomes. And so in a way, the most perverse element of this film is the paranoia that is induced by the fear of not knowing the rules and knowing the rules. And in this sense, Tinto Brass is bringing us a film that is almost Pasolini-esque in its idea that when perversion is free to operate without any signifiers or without any rules, there is nothing moral, immoral about it. But when you are learning about rules that you don't understand in order to achieve power, then you are really at risk all the time, because like fascism, these rules only operate based on an absolutely totalitarian understanding of absolutism without navigation and without negotiation. So on the one hand, we must all worship Caesar and whatever he says, even when he's making his horse his general. But on the other hand, when we see Caligula ill and we see the very sycophantic senator saying, "Oh, I would give my life," well, Caligula says, "Of course you will." And so this is how this film becomes such a political and philosophically pleasurable bifurcated film, a binary film, a film that is at once about regiments and signs of power that lead to madness, or about undifferentiated pleasures and perversions that lead to a kind of schizophrenic frenzy that is much more the bacchanalic world of ancient Rome that we think about today.